Hi, my name is Ashley Brayson, and this video is just going to show you how I modify all my airbrushes for detail work. So basically, we're going to start off with a Thayer & Chandler Omni 4000 airbrush. I've chosen this because it's a classic design. Most components in it you will find in most airbrushes, so it's just a good one to choose really. It's a very nice brush to start off with, but generally speaking, in all the airbrushes I've ever had, I nearly always find that the trigger's too low, so I prefer to make that taller. Gives you better control. I also think that generally speaking the trigger spring's too strong for me, so I'll take that out and cut a couple of coils off that. Sometimes I'll shorten the handle for better balance, and plus the fact you'd have to take the handle off then when you're going to take the needle out. And I also seal the threads at the front there, all the threads at the front, so you get no air leaking through, so all of the air is going through the nozzle. It gives much better performance. So what we're going to end up with is something like this. Trigger's about 10mm taller. It's just a rubber pad really. Now I'd recommend putting this on with not super glue, because you won't be able to take it off again, so I'd go with silicone. Silicone sealant's a good one, or you can get badge tape, which is actually used to put badges on cars. So you can peel that off if you want to make the trigger either taller or make it a little bit lower. So you don't want anything too permanent. The only permanent thing we're going to do on this is clip the trigger spring. Now if you go too far with that, the worst thing is you'll have to order a new spring, but I mean it's no big deal. Or of course if you cut the handle down as well, that's there's nothing you can do about that. I mean if you want to go back to the old handle, you'll have to buy another one. So, but it's it's nothing major. But on this one as well, I've obviously sealed the threads up as well. I like to fit a quick release adapter on there. It just gives you a little bit more to hold with as well. The balance is better. And also on this, as you can see, I've added what I like to do on an ear plug. So I add the ear plug so I can actually pull the needle out when I've undone the chuck nut. So it's just a daft little thing that I do on all my airbrushes. So basically we're going to end up with that, and it's just a nicer airbrush to use. It gives much better for doing fur, because constant triggering on this is great when you've got a looser spring and a taller trigger. So this is just how I modify all my airbrushes. Now there is another thing. What I do, first thing you should do when you get your airbrush is read the instruction manual. Take your airbrush to bits and get used to all the components. There's nothing scary about an airbrush. It's a precision instrument, but there's actually no reason why you should have to send it back to a manufacturer for any problems or anything. There's nothing to go wrong really. As long as you keep them clean and lubricated, there's nothing to go wrong. Now once you've lubricated your airbrush out the box, you might find it's fine for you. You might find that the trigger's okay and everything works alright. Well, there's no need to carry on with this video really. If you're okay with that, that's fine. This video really is just showing you what I think I need to do to the airbrushes for me. So if it's straight out of the box and you like it, leave it at that. Another thing is, when these things are built up in the factory and they're tested, they're manufactured for a general user. So sometimes you might want to modify it yourself for your particular use, which is what I do. If at the factory they were going to do that, these things would be 2 or 3 times more expensive. So it's a starting point, but if you're okay with it, just leave it at that. Okay, so I'm just going to show you now how to take the spring out, how to add the trigger pad, or what I use, and basically just the main components around the trigger area. Okay, this is a closer view of the Omni 4000 by Thayer & Chandler. This is the stock airbrush as it comes from the factory. Perfectly usable airbrush, really nice to use, but I just feel the need to enhance it just for myself. So what we're going to end up with is the modified version, chop down handle, so that I can actually pull the needle out without taking the handle off. My famous ear plug, which acts as a grip, as you see, I've extended the trigger with a rubber pad. This is probably just over 10mm taller. This particular one stuck on with that badge tape I was talking about. Now what I've used for this trigger is actually the packing from an airbrush box. I've just punched it out with a round punch and then just trimmed a chamfer on it so that my finger sits on it a bit better. I've added the quick release adapter at the bottom, the connector, so it just adds a little bit more length to the bottom, and of course I've sealed the threads at the front with some PTFE tape. So I'll just, and also of course I've shortened the spring inside here. I've clipped off 2 coils, which I thought was necessary. To begin with, I clipped off one just and put it back together again just to make sure. You don't want to go too far with that. So that's what I've done. So what I'll do now is I'll show you how to take the spring out and just show the main components of the airbrush and take it from there. Okay, so as I said before you do anything, before you modify the trigger or take any coils off the spring or shorten the handle or anything like that, strip your airbrush down, put some lube on all the moving parts. This is good stuff, badger needle juice, you can get other types, and just make sure from the start that your airbrush is lubricated. That'll give you a starting point to know whether you think you need to make it a little bit smoother, a bit lighter or whatever. As I said, these come from the factory, tested, but as a standard item. So it's up to you to modify to your requirements. Right, so let's just get to the spring. Handle off as usual. Needle chuck undone. Pull the needle straight out. Take the nut off. Take this all the way out. Okay, and there you can see the spring there. So this is the part we're after, and this is the part that we're going to take a couple of coils off. Now this has already been modified. The end was like that, now it's more open. You can see I've clipped a couple of coils off there. What I use for these is just something like this, just some little clippers. Just clip one coil off to begin with. You don't want to go too far with this, then put it back together again and see if it's light enough for you. I'd also recommend, because you get quite a sharp edge when you've clipped this off, I use one of these, which is basically a diamond stone for sharpening knives, etc. It's not as aggressive as a file. It's a good idea to just rub it over the end of the spring a few times just to round it off slightly. It'll just make it kinder on the airbrush when you put it back together. You just don't want any sharp edges in your airbrush anyway, so I'd do that. And then I'd assemble it all together again and just lube it up as you go and just see how it operates then. If one coil isn't enough, clip another one off, but I wouldn't go further than 2 coils, to be honest with you. I think you might end up having to get another spring after if you didn't go further than that. So that's the first thing. Modify your spring. Okay, so you've clipped a couple of coils off the spring, put it back together again, and if everything feels nice, that's it. However, the trigger for me is always too short. So what I do is I cut a bit of foam up. I've actually found that the packing in an airbrush box is pretty good. This is just a foam that the airbrush sits in when you get the airbrush. I've just cut a square out. You can punch a round hole out if you want, but I think on the square is okay. Sometimes I'll just put a bit of a chamfer on one edge for the profile of my finger, and then I'll basically just glue it onto the top of the trigger. As I've said before, you're not after anything too permanent. You want to be able to take this off if you want to, or maybe you want to take it off and cut it in half and put it back on again to make it a bit lower. So for that I'd use this kind of thing. This is a silicone rubber. This is by Loctite, but you can get any other kind will be okay. So basically squirt a bit on there, just press your pad down, and I just stand your airbrush up in a holder or something overnight, let that set overnight, and then you've got yourself a trigger pad. If you do need to take it off, you can actually peel this away and it won't affect anything. So it's not a permanent thing, but it will stay put if you want it to stay put. But you can get it off when you need to, or if you need to. If you start using Loctite on this, you're going to end up bonding this forever, and you're going to end up messing your trigger up completely. So don't use Loctite glue or any resin type stuff. So once you've done that, you're kind of going to end up with what we've got here. Much taller trigger, which I find so much nicer to use. You can make smaller adjustments with your air and paint. You can make the tiniest movement, which I find more difficult when it's down here. So for me it works much better. That coupled with a lighter spring, and for doing stuff like fur, it's absolutely fantastic. So the next thing, if we go around to the front of the airbrush, I'll just pull the needle back, and what I'll do is I'll show you how I seal the threads at the front. So just pull the needle back so it's out of the nozzle at the front there. Okay, we'll take the needle cap off, and we'll take this off here. Okay, now what you can see here, it's not very easy to see on camera, but in the end here you've got a series of small holes going around the nozzle. This is where the air goes. The air comes through here and over the nozzle, and then ultimately over the tip of the needle. You don't want any air escaping through the threads. You want all of that air to go over the nozzle. So the best thing to do is to get some of this plumber's PTFE tape. Basically, it can be quite awkward to use sometimes, but you just pull a bit off. Now this can be a bit wide to start off with, so I tend to get it and basically tear it in half, so it's half the width. And then what you'll do is you'll wrap that around the thread. As I said, it's a bit fiddly, but can be done with a bit of patience. Now that will seal the thread when you put this back together again. Don't use too much of this, otherwise it'll build the thread up too much and you won't actually be able to screw anything on it. So you do it to that area. You also do it to this thread as well. So basically you're sealing the whole of the front of the airbrush up, effectively maximising the output at this end, which will mean it'll eliminate any spluttering or skipping in your work. So once you've done that to the threads at the front, so we've done the trigger, the spring, and we've sealed the threads at the front. Next thing, if you want, is to cut the handle down. I usually just do mine with a hacksaw and then file it up at the end, make sure it's square at the end. I like to do the handle because even though these are cut away these days, most handles are, you can get to that and you can get it for flushing through, pull it back for flushing the nozzle through, etc. If you still want to remove the needle, you still got to take the handle off, which I find a bit of a pain. So I cut mine down. It's a lot shorter, so that when I actually undo the chucking nut, I can pull this out without taking the handle off. I also find the balance is slightly better. We sort of turn it into a bit of a sports car, I suppose.